Hello everyone, Eugene here again, and this is part 2 of my Spider-Man retrospect, just in time for the release of Marvel and Sony's Spider-Man No Way Home in theaters December 17th. Now, if you haven't seen the first part where I go over the Tobey Maguire era, I urge you guys to pause this, take a look at that, and then come back to me whenever you can, or wait for this video to end and you can go back to that one, whichever you want. So I had mentioned in the first part during the Tobey Maguire era, everything was looking nice for the first 2 films, then all of a sudden Spider-Man 3 wet the bed. Now with that lackluster landing, it ultimately scrapped Spider-Man 4 from ever being created due to the director and the producers and studio not being able to come to an agreement in regards to the story for the 4th. But even though the 4th film was scrapped, there was still plans for Sony to develop a Spider-Man movie. It would just be a matter of what kind of Spider-Man movie. And that led to Sony deciding that they're going to just reboot the entire series and retell the story of Peter Parker, but this time in a darker, moodier mood. You gotta remember, this was the time during the Dark Knight trilogy coming out and really kind of the origin story of superheroes being a little bit more brooding and eerie. So ultimately, Spider-Man took that same avenue as well. In 2012, Sony rebooted the Spider-Man series and started with The Amazing Spider-Man, directed by Mark Webb and starring a new Peter Parker in Andrew Garfield. Now, the movie didn't do astronomical numbers like the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies did. It didn't open to 100+ million opening weekend. It didn't even crack 800 million worldwide. But there was a lot of potential in this one, and I'll give it that so much. Andrew Garfield as Spider-Man was definitely something that was to behold. He had the body language for it, he had the rhetoric for it. Andrew Garfield as Spider-Man was pretty, no pun intended, amazing. And I like how this was a bit more of a deeper look at Peter Parker. Because if you watch this, you can kind of tell, especially if you watch the Raimi version of Spider-Man, like what happens here, what happens there, especially with Peter Parker's upbringing and then of course Uncle Ben's death. We kind of already knew how this song and dance went, but to see a little bit more in regards to Peter's past, that was interesting and something that I felt like, okay, I want to see more of this. I really want to see more of this. So in the grand scheme of things, I think Amazing Spider-Man did a well enough job for us. It tickled our fancy. We wanted to see more of this. We were intrigued to see really kind of the darkness behind Peter's past and really how it reflects to what he is now. It may not have been the strongest Spider-Man movie, but it was definitely better than Spider-Man 3. So I think with that, a lot of people kind of dug this film. While not universally acclaimed, it was still enough to get Sony to say, we're going to make a part 2. And a part 2 did they make. Yeah, part 2 they made. Yeah. Amazing Spider-Man 2. It was better than Spider-Man 3. And that's not really saying much. I think a lot of what Amazing Spider-Man 2 really faltered from was the same as what Spider-Man 3 faltered from. Lackluster narrative, moping Spider-Man, surplus of villains, and yeah, I think that's where it ultimately failed us. Like Jamie Foxx in that blue Smurf-looking Electro outfit and getup, cringeworthy. Rhino, which was perceived to be in a majority of this film, was only around for like not even 10 minutes of screen time. And Dane DeHaan, as great as Dane DeHaan is as an actor, really wasn't feeling him as Harry Osborn, aka Green Goblin, in this. He did have a good sinister look on him, but just wasn't good in the long run. But the reason why I would put this over Spider-Man 3 was its dramatic and eye-popping scene. And if you know what I mean obviously you know what I mean, you've seen this movie. You know what I mean. The fall and death of Gwen Stacy. Still to this day, a very, very disturbing and very hard to watch type of scene in which Spider-Man tries and attempts to save Gwen Stacy, but ultimately catching her and the web really not being able to help out and her neck cracking back. Oh God. Just the sound of it, I mean, it cringes a lot of people in, you know, a very, very haunting way. So that kind of impact, no pun intended, really kind of left a stamp on this film to say that, you know, while it was a little trash throughout, I am eager to see where Peter Parker goes from here. He lost his uncle, he lost the love of his life's father, his best friend turned evil, and then finally he lost the love of his life. So much loss, so much grief. It did pique my interest to wonder, where does this Peter Parker go from here? Now, while it was trash, I was optimistic. I was anticipating for what The Amazing Spider-Man 3 could produce with this version of Peter Parker and all of the losses that he suffered and where he goes from here. Now, the overall negative response of this film left a lasting impact on Sony, as before the movie even came out, Sony was already planning future spin-off projects in the Spider-Man universe. Of course, they were planning Amazing Spider-Man 3, they were planning Sinister 6, which I still wonder how that was going to be pulled off. Hell, they even planned a spin-off Aunt May movie. Like, that was really how desperate Sony was, especially after how bad The Amazing Spider-Man 2 was. But the negative responses dampened them, and Sony had to halt and ultimately cancel all their future spin-offs and films for Spider-Man. This really left Sony in limbo. We were in like a limbo situation with Spider-Man. What do they do now? Where do they go from here? Do they reboot again? What goes on from here? Well, there was a certain cameo that took place in 2016 that would not only revitalize Spider-Man, but revitalize Sony in regards to creating new Spider-Man films. Now, we will get to that in part 3 with the Tom Holland era of this Spider-Man retrospect. Once again, if you haven't seen part 1, the Tobey Maguire era, I urge you guys to take a look at that. And be on the lookout for part 3 tomorrow as we get closer and closer each day, each hour, each minute, each second to the release of the eagerly anticipated, long-awaited Spider-Man sequel known as Spider-Man No Way Home. Once again, hope you guys got your tickets. Hopefully you, your loved ones, your friends, someone was able to get you tickets. And yeah, can't wait for the 16th or 17th, depending on when you're watching. Cannot wait for those days as we all gather in the theater and just kind of enter the world of Spider-Man. Thank you guys for tuning in again. Eugene signing off, and I will see you again tomorrow for the third and final part of this Spider-Man retrospect.